Patrons. Hi, patrons.
All right. What's up, y'all?
I have paint in my hair.
Mm-hmm. We've been partying over here.
That's how we party. We put paint in our
That's
hair.
how we party. We just paint. Yeah, it's a new thing. It's like we're like it's like I imagine if orcas could get it on it, they would put paint on their heads too.
That's pretty good.
It's the new Jinkos, you know.
Oh man, those are some callbacks right there. That's pretty good.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah. I saw Jinkos at a show that I went to last night and I was like, I
wow.
hate everything that's happening right now. Like I was like, this is terrible. Like the youth are taking over and they're taking stuff from they're like time traveling. It's like they're popular again.
Wow, that surprises me greatly. Um,
Uh-huh. It's a whole
there's a
thing.
there's a Dance Gavin Dance lyric about something in 2003 camping out in Jinko jeans. The ecstasy was super clean. Like that's how the lyric goes.
Well,
Um,
in 2023, Jinkos came back and they are very back right now. Like it's Jinkos and like everybody looks like they are an extra in a Papa Roach video right now. Like, and that's the style.
An extra Papa Roach video. Oh god. That's
that is the
that's
style right
fucking
now. That's what's in
hilarious.
that's what's in right now. So
Oh jeez. Okay. I have not seen one pair of like big baggy jeans anywhere around here, so I'm wondering
oh,
I wonder if this is a coastal thing.
it might be. I mean, I feel like things happen on the east and the west coast and then they merge in the middle somewhere. So like it's just bound to get to you at some point in time.
Yeah, well, it seems like California usually starts things off. Jesus fuck me Christ. I decided to just Google images of Jinko jeans and it reminds me so much of high school and like middle school and it's so fucking weird. And yeah,
Uh-huh.
those are horrendous looking pants.
And they are expensive pants. Like if you look
They
at buying
are.
Jinkos right now, they're like $200 a pair.
Oh my God. I mean, they were expensive back in the day, like real ones. There were tons of
Yeah.
knockoffs. And just the sheer amount of material it takes to make one of these pairs of
Yeah.
pants.
Yeah, I don't think they make anything off of them because there's no way because the cost is so great.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so you're welcome for that. Maybe we'll do an
Thank you.
episode on why we
Yeah.
Jinko.
Wow. Well, that sure is bizarre. I sure
Yep.
do not know what to think about that.
Yep. Welcome to my world right now. So my
So are your
daughter,
kids
like, it's
wearing
not in a Jinkos.
Jinkos?
No, 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 no. My daughter is like dressing like everybody I knew in the 90s. I'm like, what is going on right now? Like, it is like
Wow.
she's like got like there's some she'll wear something. I'm like, huh, all right. Like this is what we're doing now, I guess. Okay, all right. Like I'm just like
Yeah.
watching like fashion from when I was a kid start to show up again. I'm like, I can't handle it. Like it's just a strange experience.
Yeah. That was not a great time for fashion. Uh
Mm.
I always
No,
complained about the
everything
80s,
was
but I was
baggy and
like
silver.
yeah. The late 90s, early 2000s, well, 90s in general, but mostly late 90s, early 2000s were rough for fashion as well.
I was telling somebody the other day about those. There's like a pair of oak, there's like this like type of Oakley's glasses. They were
Mhm.
like everybody thought it was going to be the future of sunglasses because they looked futuristic. I don't know if you remember them, but
Yeah.
they were like circular and they instead of going over your ears, they went up over the top of your head and wrapped around the back of
Oh,
your
I
head.
do remember those. Yeah.
So I was explaining that to somebody, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" I was like, "I promise this is real. Like, this is a thing that like everybody thought it was cool because it's futuristic." And I showed like people I was working with, and they're like, "That is the worst thing I've ever seen. Like, literally the worst thing." And I had to like if you and for patrons you're here, if you've never seen it, you should look it up because they're horrendous.
Oh, look at these Oakleys over the top.
It's so bad.
We're
Like
really
so bad.
expanding sunglass technology, you guys.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And like, where's it at now, you know?
Yeah.
They
They look like
stopped.
they're trying to be a villain in like a DC comic.
Yeah. Yeah. Like like they look like they think they're gonna run much faster than they will.
Well, what was it? There's a picture of some Olympic athlete or some athlete of some sort
All I'm saying is that
running
you've
with
never seen
these on.
Usain Bolt wearing them. That's all I'm saying. You've never seen
It's
Usain
fair.
Bolt wearing them, so
Yeah.
ugh, what a time to be alive.
Who's saying now? Um,
Ugh.
cool.
So today,
Uh,
folks, we should probably tell our patrons what we're doing.
oh yeah. Fuck.
We're starting our series on addiction. So we're going to be diving into uh a lot of different topics around addiction, treatment, policy, myth busting. We're going to do a lot of stuff around that. And so today this episode is really kind of like an introduction to all of that. So we're going to, kind of just to start to ease people in.
Yes. Um, I was pulling my list of people so I could thank them at the end.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about Jinkos. Um,
Why we Jinko?
yeah. The extensive collection of suite of episodes on addiction. Um, I had some ideas for some topics I wanted to hit, and I completely forgot what they were now. But I was thinking like, oh, we should maybe try and tackle that soon. I've kind of have been feeling like because this is a big election year that it might be worth tackling a couple of election related things. Um, and I couldn't remember all what I had in mind. Um, but one that I've been wanting to do for a while is voter fraud.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
and voter suppression tactics, I think. Vote tampering, I
Yeah, that'd
guess, is
probably be
just
really
the
good.
general category there.
Yeah, because I think that's like a very real concern right now with everything going on.
I've
Or maybe
also
not
kind of felt,
not as real as we think, but
yeah, exactly. It's a is a real talking point.
that's a fair way to say it.
Yeah. I've been kind of thinking. Oh, I had a Halloween episode too. I forgot to write that down. That one will come back to me for sure. But anyway, yeah, I was kind of thinking that at some point doing something where it's like just myth busting, like an interview with Donald Trump or a rant of his or a Fox News thing or something where it's just like they just say so much shit that's wrong, and it's just sort of
Uh-huh.
like we'll just we'll just spend an episode taking them point by point, taking them down, because there's stuff in here that like I think we often don't see, um that we miss as a potential area that is like they're making arguments that are persuading people and we're not hearing those arguments because they're not as like as tantalizing, titillating, and
Right.
as some of the other things that they say and do, and so they kind of fly under the radar, but those are kind of some of the arguments that convince people of their position. And part of my where I observed this in doing the AA stuff is I accidentally stumbled upon a YouTube video with Jordan Peterson.
Ugh.
And yeah,
Sworn enemy of the
uh,
show.
yes. And so someone was interviewing him for whatever YouTube channel or podcast or whatever the fuck they do, and had him on. And this person basically starts with, AA is the greatest thing, and we know that it works completely, and I know that it's helped me and it's helped other people around me. And like, why is it that like that people that AA is so successful and so popular and so many people turn to it? And Jordan Peterson's first thing is like, well, there's no alternative. Like, what else are you going to do? You have to do AA. I'm like, God, you couldn't even just Google search alternatives to AA like
Right.
real quick. Because I'm like, not only are there alternatives, but as I said when I was telling you earlier, the research seems to suggest that some of them, 2/3 of them, outperformed AA on some metrics.
Right.
So,
Well, I think
um,
we've kind of established that Jordan Peterson is not living in the world of science. Like, I think that's not really
no,
what that's not his crowd.
but they say shit like that where it's like they just say it as if it's just a thing, and people then buy it. They're like, oh, AA works because it's the only option, and like that's we don't need anything else because we have AA. And
Right.
like they'll just buy it, and like and so that's why I was sort of thinking, I'm like, I kind of in a sense want to take down like a discussion or a rally or a rant or it's maybe several of them and just like take their points and just dismantle them one at a time because they say just nonstop stream of absolute bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's beautiful. I love that.
Okay.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, just been thinking, using my noodle.
Oh, I love when you use your noodle. Oh man.
Not when I have used my noodle.
Nope. No. That's a different issue.
All right. All right. I think I'm good to get started on this though.
Yeah. I'm ready when you are.
We have time for a minute today as well.
We should.
Cool. All right. I will count us down. Are you ready?
Yep, let's do
Just turn to the meeting summary thing.
it.
All right. Oh, I should probably check my levels first just to make sure everything's working the way that it's supposed to be working in the way that it's supposed to be working. And if you want to just check, make sure you're on the right audio input as well.
Yes, I am good on my end.
Great. Okay, cool. Okay. Ready?
Uh-huh.
3, 2, 1, go. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your dependent host, Abraham.
And I'm your complex host, Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk about all the things that people and animals do. And sometimes when they do them so much, they do it to their own detriment. And so that means that we're doing something a little bit different for a few weeks moving forward, possibly many, depending, which is that we are going to embark on a journey, a multi-episode commitment of a journey on the topic of addiction.
Yes, this is something that we've talked about for some years, because we felt like it is something that is so, I guess, impactful for the human experience, and it impacts so many people throughout society and communities and stuff like that. And as we started to kind of I started kind of like brainstorm some topics. We just have always kind of come up with this issue that it was too big for a single topic
Yeah,
or a single
right.
episode. And then even kind of talking about it this way, we were like, it's too big for 3 episodes. So we want to kind of really spend some time talking about what it looks like, what it means, in a lot of different kind of topics inside of it. And you'll see kind of how complex it gets as we go forward here.
Yeah, and I think trying to unpack it from the position that we come from, which is a little bit different from where I think most people think about the idea of dependency and addiction and all of those things is there. I think there's been a very popularized and common notion that people have approached addiction. I think there is a very stigmatized position that many people have about it. And we're going to try and come at it from the scientific, behavioral, I think both empathetic, but also very pragmatic approach of trying to understand how addiction works, the various aspects and elements of addiction as it relates to things like treatment, some controversies, I think, and misunderstandings that people have about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's going to be just a different take that most people will have probably encountered most of the time because, and I don't want to spoil too much as we're getting into this, but I think the most common way that people think about addiction and dependency is a way that I think we find mostly counterproductive.
Right. And yeah, and I think with that, and we'll get into all that, but I think even inside of that, having conversations around language around addiction, having conversations around perspectives and myth busting around this stuff too, I think is super important because um I think there's definitely and when we talk about depictions of addiction in the media and data and all of these things, as we start to unpack all of it, you're going to find that it is far more complicated than people give it credit for, and also not quite as scary. I should maybe it's probably not the right word, but it's not quite as I guess when we get into something like the opioid crisis, it's not what it seems in a lot of different spaces. And I think that's kind of an important piece to unpack there too. So, but we'll get to all that in some episode at some point.
Yes. Today, we're primarily going to be tackling just the beginning idea of unpacking addiction. We're going to talk about definitions. We're going to try and work through the commonly held beliefs about what sort of the model of addiction is and has
Mm-hmm.
been. And so this is our introduction episode, the primer or primer, depending on where you're coming from, on in terms of how you articulate that word, on what addiction is, and we're going to do our best to bring our interpretation to it, and then we'll get into the more nuanced stuff down the road, and also the very specific applications of this. We'll talk about treatments, we'll talk about controversies, we'll talk about different types of addiction. But today is the sort of the zoomed out view, if you will, of that.
Right. Absolutely. But before we do all that, we've got to celebrate some stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you are joining us on the Wednesday that this releases, and this comes out every Wednesday, or not this episode, but an episode that we have recorded comes out every Wednesday, then we would like to wish you a happy American Red Cross Giving Day. So go give to the Red Cross, blood or
Yeah.
money, or
Um,
maybe high fives.
high fives. I mean, that's fine too. It's Holy Wednesday, so make sure you have enough Swiss cheese available.
It's Little Red Wagon Day. Is this in reference to Prince at all?
I
Little
think
Red
so.
Wagon.
Yeah, that's the song, I think. Yeah. One of my favorite days ever, it's Manatee Appreciation Day. Manatees are so cool.
Oh, yay. Love that. I appreciate manatees.
They're so great.
It's National Scribble Day.
Hey, that's just every day for me in my handwriting. Oh, excuse me. It's National Spanish Paella Day.
Ooh, delicious.
Delicious.
Yeah. It's Viagra Day. Maybe less delicious. Maybe more for
I
some.
mean, I guess it depends on your preference, I guess. It's World Theater Day, which I think is a super important part of the arts that we should spend more time with.
It is National Cleaning Week. I can very much appreciate this personally.
I like that. I also appreciate that it's National Green Week.
Ooh, me too. And National Physicians Week. So, assuming you have a good doctor, celebrate that doctor.
Yes, 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 yes. It's also National Secondhand Shopping Week, which I think is really great. If we go subscribe to what we learned in the 90s, which was reduce, reuse, and recycle, I think it applies to the reuse part.
Yeah, which could be the reason that we're seeing a comeback in Jinko jeans, or reusing those.
Ugh, yeah, that's fair. For like
They,
parachutes and stuff because they're large enough.
they are. We are also still in Ramadan, so to those of you celebrating, we see you.
Yes, and then it is Week of Solidarity with the people struggle against racism and racial discrimination. So
Oof.
support those folks. Be a good ally. Be a good colleague, and support those folks in standing up against racism.
Indeed. And so, as I said, as we talked about already, we're talking about addiction today and the sort of overview of what that is. If you do like what you heard today and you would like to support us, you can join us on Patreon, pick up some merch, leave us a rating and review. You can brain short circuit.
Sponsor someone.
You can um you can God damn it, I already lost it again. It was pick up some merch, join us on Patreon, leave in a rating and review, and there was one more thing I was gonna say. It wasn't sponsors. I mean, that's good, is good. I had it and I lost it again. What's going on with me today? I need coffee. I so badly need coffee.
Yeah, we got to get you some coffee.
Oh, okay. You can tell a friend, you can sponsor someone and call them why we do what we maybe why we don't do what we do.
Uh-huh.
Because you want the sponsorship is to not do that thing. And we'll talk more about the ways that you can support us and kind of about sponsorship at the end of this episode or sponsorship at least and probably another episode. But let's get into our topic at hand here, at which is understanding what addiction is, and a very important part to start in most conversations, certainly in this one, is
Yeah.
definitions.
Yes. So, the first definition you find when you start kind of diving into the world of addiction is the fact or condition of being addicted to a particular substance, thing, or activity. And I want to emphasize that it says specifically substance, thing, or activity. Okay, and we're gonna unpack that quite a bit as we go.
What I don't like about that is that it says addiction is being addicted. Like unhelpful.
Yeah. Yeah. But thankfully, there are other definitions. There are several definitions because there's not really a great agreed upon definition of what addiction is.
There's also a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experience.
So that's closer. There's also a compulsive, chronic, physiological, or psychological need for a habit forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects, and typically causing well defined symptoms such as anxiety, irritability, tremors, or nausea upon withdrawal or abstinence. I think that's the closest we've gotten so far.
Yeah, that one I think helps rule out some non-examples, which I think we'll need to get to here in a moment.
Yeah.
Another one is a strong inclination to do, use, or indulge in something repeatedly. I have some
Mhm.
umbrage with that one, but we can get to our last definition, then I'll take aim at some of these.
Yeah. And then a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite adverse consequences. It is considered a brain disorder because it involves functional changes to the brain circuits involved in reward, stress, and self control.
Okay, so I think the one of the defining features that we need to always have in place when we're working through describing something in such a way that we have a clear understanding of what we're talking about is understanding what kinds of things get lumped in with the definition. So think of a non-example of something that would technically meet that definition, and then you have a way of testing the goodness of that definition, how
Sure.
well it's able to describe or define its topic. So if we look at the first one, a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, the environment, and an individual's life experience, cancer. That very much, I think, meets the definition, that definition. And I don't think that we
Right.
would call cancer an addiction. So I think many things that are medical issues would unfortunately meet that definition. And that's why I think that one is not very good, is it's too inclusive and it includes things that we would not call addiction. And I also don't think it necessarily it does a good job capturing the important pieces of addiction, which include this fact that it is a repeated behavior that is that there's a sort of frequent seeking out. There's a frequent manufacturing of specific or of trying to obtain very specific outcomes that is not sort of caught in this definition.
Right. And I think, when you kind of unpack it, there's the other one where it says a strong inclination to do, use, or indulge in something repeatedly. You can make the argument that like getting dressed when you go outside could fit inside of that
Yeah.
because I have a strong
Yes.
inclination to stay dressed and not have my neighbor see me naked. Or like food, right? Just like regular
Yes,
food habits
exactly.
could be
Yeah.
considered inside
Eating.
of that. And so just
Yeah.
eating as a general rule, like, do you eat breakfast every day? Well, by that definition, when you wake up and you're hungry, which gives you a strong inclination to do it, you're going to indulge in breakfast. So that becomes a problem. So, like, as we kind of as you see here, there are some that are not quite there. There are some that are there, but like have some elements of it. And that's the thing. I think this is part of why we wanted to spend so much time on it, is because it is so difficult to define something that is this complex.
Yeah. And so we don't need to necessarily go point by point tearing these apart. But I think you exactly pointed out the issues that I think is that some of these definitions, I think, do not sufficiently exclude the kinds of things that are normal behavior. And they also don't necessarily sufficiently include the things that are the kinds of behaviors that we do see when we're trying to talk about this thing that is addiction. And so and why I think that's useful is because we start then talking about things like treatment, How do we know if someone even warrants a thing like treatment? Because there's that strong inclination to do something repeatedly. There's exercise, and I think people can be addicted to exercise, but that definition doesn't tell us whether what they're doing is at the point where it is problematic. And therein
Right.
lies, I think, one of the core features of this is that it has to be in some way causing harm to the individual.
Right. So, based on those definitions we just talked about, it would stand to reason that addiction includes a few different things, which is first, there is a repeated behavior or action where the organism seeks out whatever that substance or activity is. Like, so there is that repeated action over and over and over again. But the second part of this that we have to have is that it's harmful or adverse to the organism. So some like that repeated action is resulting in either long sustained harm or short-term harm, but harm regardless, and harm or some kind of adverse effect. And that could be psychological, social, physiological, neurological, some type of harm as a result of this repeated behavior or repeated exposure to the substance as part of that kind of habit forming practice.
And there is an element in here that, again, I think we want to rule out things that shouldn't count. And so, due to neurological effects, that's either categorized as a brain disorder or as an addictive disorder. Because if there was a brain disorder that best accounts for that type of behavior, then we would treat that very differently than we would the things that we are also calling addiction. Right.
Right.
And so that's why we have to say, like, we have to identify all the relevant and important components of the definition to best understand what kind of things count and what kind of things don't. Because, and for one reason, as I said, it does inform treatment, and for another, I think it also informs things. Well, in related to treatment, it also is things like intervention, whether insurance covers this or that sort of thing.
Right.
So yeah, like I said, just it's important to include those sort of critical aspects of the what gets included, what gets excluded, not like the things that are so uncritical and unimportant like ads.
Oh, that was good. I was like, that I was not ready for that. So that was nice.
Thanks. I had a better segue, but I talked myself away from it, and then I had to try and get back. So, but here we are.
I think that works.
All right, let's return from the break to the advertisers, and talk about these sort of these features, as we said, the neurological conditions as they relate to addiction.
Right. So when we start talking about how addiction is classified, according to modern psychology, or modern diagnoses, medical models, we are often categorized addiction as either a brain disorder or an addictive disorder. Now, here's the thing: is sometimes an addictive disorder can result in brain damage that turns it also into a brain disorder. So calling it one or the other is not sufficient in describing what is happening. But just to kind of clarify, a brain disorder is any condition marked by disruptions of normal functioning of the brain that usually includes some type of damage to the structures of the brain that includes Alzheimer's, dementia, brain cancer, epilepsy, seizure disorders, Parkinson's, stroke, et cetera, et cetera. So those types of medical conditions are considered brain disorders because something is happening that disrupts kind of the ideal, general, typical functioning of the brain in the way that our brain kind of works on a day-to-day basis.
I imagine other like traumatic brain injury in
Yes.
some capacity would also relate to this. So yeah,
Right.
important to consider those. All right, so then we have addictive disorders, and I actually, sorry, before I jump into this, I think I it's probably worth saying for those of you who are hearing this and maybe on the sort of cutting edge of what's considered PC, or those of you who aren't and really don't care. Either way, we're going to have the conversation. Which there's been some move away from calling things addiction, instead calling them dependency. I think there's not a lot of consensus just yet on whether one of those is considered more appropriate, at least that I was able to see in preparing for this. But the other thing I've heard is there's a move toward the first and first language versus identity first language in this realm, calling someone an addict or a person with dependency, or a dependent person, like that sort of thing. And so there's some discussion around the sort of PC-ness of this and where people are. And I think that a lot of advocates find themselves on the person first language right now to try and draw stigma away from the people who are suffering with addiction. So I understand that that is a conversation that is being had, and we'll try and be mindful of that. And so right now, we're really not talking about any people. we're just trying to unpack this definition as it relates to these behaviors.
Right, that's fair. So when we are talking about the types of disorders that are still classified, that we are talking about this idea of an addictive disorder. And addictive disorders are chronic, relapsing disorders characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite adverse consequences. So that kind of goes back to what we were saying before. It's a repeated behavior or repeated use that has some adverse consequence to the organism.
Right. And so this includes uncontrolled use of a substance despite the harmful consequences, which may include things such as alcohol, tobacco, or other illicit drugs, or behavioral addiction disorders, which can include things such as gambling, overeating, television, internet addiction, etc. We actually did a social media addiction episode a while ago.
Right.
But yeah, I think the important thing there is like there is often what you might call uncontrolled use of substances and that do not have a harmful consequence. And that's again why we had to include that part of it, is because I think you have, let's just say, a high use of body lotion. Like probably unless you're like using this way too much, like
Uh-huh.
if you were using it in an uncontrolled way, like no one's specifically telling you how much you can use and you're more or less applying it whenever you want to, that doesn't even necessarily mean that it happens that often. But if it's not causing you harm, then it's really wouldn't be a good thing to include in talking about addiction. And so we want to rule that out.
Right. Plus your skin would be so soft. So yeah, I think as we kind of unpack this, everybody, and I wanted to say too, I think everybody, if you're listening to this, whether you've had experience with addiction or not, or around addiction, we are really going to work hard not to overgeneralize the discussions around this, because I think that
Yeah.
every situation, every circumstance is unique. And we are really trying to approach this from a space of, every single person has a unique condition or circumstance or set of circumstances that has led them towards these types of behaviors, that has led them away from these types of behaviors. Sometimes they are really intense and really traumatic. Sometimes they are as simple as somebody waking up one day going, I'm done with this. So there's no judgment on that front. I think that it is a very complex thing. And as we start to unpack that, I just want everybody to know that like we are going to try to not overgeneralize this stuff as much as we can because of those unique circumstances for everybody that experiences it. Either directly or tangentially.
Yeah, completely agree, and that is absolutely correct. And I don't know if this is worth stating here exactly, but because we didn't say why we wanted to take on this issue earlier when we were introducing today's episode and this whole series of episodes that we're planning.
Yeah.
But I think there's a sort of twofold reason in my mind, and so I want you to weigh in as well because we're in unscripted territory right now, which
Yeah.
is that one of the reasons was that both of us have had addiction in our lives around us mostly. Like
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people with addiction issues in my life for about as long as I can remember, and so it's something that has sort of felt very present. And I would imagine that most people hearing that could say the same. Like, I think this is
Right.
so prevalent in so many aspects of our lives that I think most people have a connection that's one or at most two nodes away from them in terms of like someone they know or someone they know who knows someone who has dealt with this, or someone who is dealing with this currently or has dealt with this in the past who might be a listener. And so that's one reason. It's just stopped recording all of a sudden.
Oh no.
Okay. Let me just see where it picked up. Okay. So that's one reason. The other reason is that I just think it is interesting. It is interesting from a psychological perspective, but also specifically from a behavioral perspective and unpacking how we would interpret what's going on with this in a way that I think is unique to how most other people have encountered it. And that is I sort of talked about that initially, but those are in my mind the two reasons that were why we wanted to embark on this journey and talking about
Yeah.
addiction so much. Yeah. So I think in and I think we'll, I'm not getting into that now. We'll set aside some time to share our personal experiences at some point on this journey.
Right, absolutely. So as we kind of because I agree. I think there are a lot of different ways to look at it. I think this is a very personal and a very personal topic for both of us, and I think that's where this is going to come from. And I know that we'll kind of unpack that a little bit with some tact and some respect for the people that are involved in that and all that. But yeah, let's I think just a quick shift. I think we should talk about how the DSM likes to look at addictions and different types of addictions, because we just described this set of behaviors that are repetitive towards either substances or activities or whatnot. But I think it's really fascinating how this gets classified. And the DSM-5 actually classifies the substance abuse types into 9 general categories. And that's going to be alcohol, caffeine, cannabis, hallucinogens, inhalants, opioids. There's a whole category for sedatives, hypnotics, and anxiolytics. There's stimulants, and then there's tobacco. I drink so much coffee that this made me worry for a second. I was like,
Yeah.
and it's, I'm not like emptying my bank account for coffee, though, given the chance I might,
Same. Yeah, I say one of those definitely stands out to me, and that is caffeine.
Yes.
And then for those people who maybe are not necessarily in the sort of psychological orbit, who are listening to this, who are maybe not from this country, who for whatever reason you haven't encountered this, which it's fine. It's just the thing. The DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is our sort of our guidebook in the United States. This is sort of run by the American Psychological Association, that it goes about classifying diagnosable mental health conditions.
Right.
So I know a lot of people around the world use the ICD, but we use the I think it's called ICD, isn't it?
Right. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, internal classification. I was trying to remember what it stood for. So a lot of people use the ICD in other parts of the world, many parts of the world, but in the United States, we rely on our DSM as it pertains to mental health disorders specifically.
Yes. So inside of our manual that we like to reference so much, there are other types of addiction, and they do mention food addiction, sex addiction, gambling, internet addiction, video games, and shopping. So these are all mentioned as part of different types of behaviors that can have adverse effects on folks. Food addiction, overeating can result in a significant weight gain. Sexual addiction can actually have detriment to people's social relationships and personal relationships. Gambling has a lot of adverse effects that include financial and social social loss and stuff like that. And so you'll see kind of, on the surface, it's like, okay, well, maybe I could go play a couple games at the casino or something like that. But it becomes insidious when people start putting up their houses and they start losing their cars and they start getting into tens of thousands of dollars into debt, because the house always wins. And so you start kind of seeing that it starts with something simple and innocuous and can turn into something pretty great and detrimental pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that raises the point that oftentimes what becomes addiction often starts as totally normal, totally harmless behavior.
Yeah.
That because even using drugs one time, while it might have deleterious effects in some way, or otherwise be problematic, may very well may not turn into a full blown addiction. Even
Right.
using drugs occasionally will probably not meet the definition of addiction sufficiently for that it would warrant some kind of specific intervention.
Right.
And plenty of things like food, sex, shopping, like those are things that are everybody is doing. And so it's not everybody, almost everybody, a lot of people are
Right.
doing, we'll just say that.
Right.
But it doesn't meet the definition of addiction until it sort of crosses a threshold. And I think that is probably applicable to most, if not all of these, is the frequency is the important part in a way.
Right. And another side of this too is that there are other behaviors that are starting to emerge that you could they don't have a formal classification underneath this addictive disorder type of thing, but they could at some point in time, if it starts getting evaluated more, things like body modification, cosmetic surgery,
Yep.
pornography, exercise, work, cutting, stealing, fire use, spiritual addiction was even mentioned in some of the comments. You know,
Sure.
like you got folks that are like really, really fundamentalist and maybe engage in like pretty dangerous types of religious fervor. So you kind of start seeing that, you know, there are a lot of ways this can manifest, and which makes it even more complicated, because I think for the most part, when people talk about addiction, they're talking about substance addictions. They're not talking about these other things where I mean, you see reality television shows where people have had so much plastic surgery that they're thousands of dollars in debt, in loans, and they are hurting themselves, and there are doctors that are refusing to do more because they're just saying it's too much. You know, there's a lot of different
Yeah.
things that could happen here, and I think that, you know, at the end of the day, when we go back to that description of what addiction is, it's a set of behaviors that are repeated, that are causing harm or some disadvantage or some type of poor outcome for that person on a pretty significant level.
Absolutely. All right. So we do have to, I think, and start to try and unpack this. And I think this is where we start to really bring in our own unique backgrounds and orientation to the topic of addiction that it distinguishes us, or maybe not us, but like the philosophy that we are bringing with us relative to what's most popular. So there's the first of all, I think where we would come from is that this is not a solely biological event for a lot of reasons, but this
Right.
is nature and nurture always working together because they're inseparable aspects of one's development, right?
Right.
And so I think in unpacking this, there's much to discuss in the issue of addiction being something that you are born with. For those of us who with addiction in our family, it is easy to believe that we are more likely to have addictive personalities or be at risk of some type of addiction because someone in our family was. But it is worth unpacking, like, what is the validity of that hypothesis?
Yeah, I mean, I know that you and I have both heard that a lot. That like, if there's
Sure.
somewhere down the line, you know, like somebody had this, it's like, well, you're more likely to, and maybe statistically that might be true, and we'll kind of unpack a little bit of that. But I think the first thing we have to kind of dive into is this idea that addiction is genetic, and there are some studies that shown about half of a person's risk factors, and I think that's really important. About half of their risk factors are related to their genetic makeup. All this means is that they have some genes that are related to addiction that are passed down, and families have said genes that they have those genes, they have an increased risk. So that does not guarantee that you are going to be an addict or that you're going to have dependency. Like, that does not guarantee that you are going to end up in a space where you're going to require treatment. That does not guarantee anything. It just means that on a genetic level, you might have a predisposition to have a greater risk of starting to fall down that pathway, or like starting to gain behaviors that lead to harmful outcomes.
Well, and then you always have to, I think, factor in, because you're talking about like you see someone who is genetically related to someone who engages in some kind of addictive behaviors. And then we see that this other person who has similar genes to them also engages in some addictive behaviors. And then we say, well, it must be the genes. I'm like, there's, I mean, two things with that. One is like, um, if they're around each other, why is this not maybe, why don't we look at the social aspect of this first? And the other
Right.
is like, how there are two people who are unrelated who also engage in addictive behaviors, right? So it can't be their genes that are contributing to that. And granted, some people can have similar genes to one another that without being related, obviously. But I just considering that like we even if you don't encounter addiction from someone in your family, you're probably going to encounter these types of substances elsewhere and from other people. And so it's like until you've ruled out the social factors that we know 100% are contributing factors, how much
Right.
stock is worth putting into the genes. And we know that genes don't code for specific behaviors. Our genes don't know what pornography is. Our genes
Right.
don't know what cocaine is. Our genes don't know what video games are. And so like our genes can't push us to seek those things out. Now, whether there is something to the how susceptible we are to the kinds of reinforcement that comes from those, I guess that we certainly have to have some susceptibility. And the fact that somebody does something addictive means that they had the capacity for it in some case, which means that genes were at least made that possible at the very least. And so it's not
Right.
unreasonable to say that there are some genes that maybe make that more or less likely, but there are also genes that reduce the risk of addiction. Genes are weird.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
drop this on us, Shane. What's the truth bomb about genes reducing addiction?
So check this out. This was one of my favorite parts of doing this these notes. So first, there is a variation of the alcohol genase 2 gene, dehydrogenase 2 gene, which is shorthand is ALDH2 asterisk 2. And that actually makes you allergic to alcohol. So there are folks with this variation that will experience nausea, flushing, headaches, and increased heart rates from drinking. So my wife has this. She does not drink anymore because her face turns bright red. She feels like she can't breathe anytime she has alcohol.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever met anybody that I've known who had this. But I'm sure I know obviously it's a thing that exists out there.
Yeah.
Do you hear about the one that like there's a tick can bite you and make you allergic to red meat? Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard of that too, which is wild.
I wonder if there's a gene that makes you allergic to ads.
Oh, that was good.
I realized the time it was like, oh shit.
You're on it. Like, that was good.
Thanks. Okay. Well, I'm still blowing my nose from that ad break, and we are back. From my allergic reaction to the gene to the ads.
Yeah, that was so fun. So continuing with genes and how these work with and without addictions and how they kind of prime you or don't. The A1 form allele of the dopamine receptor gene DRD2, which sounds like a really fun Star Wars character as well.
R2D2.
Yeah, it's all there, right? Like it's all there, it's just rearranged. It's like his weird cousin, or like maybe like his like Bizarro version. So DRD2 is more common in people with addictions to alcohol, cocaine, and opioids specifically. This A1 form. This gene, what it does is it alters the reward pathways in the brain. So it just makes it so that we are more susceptible to higher reward payouts, I guess, when we do access these types of substances. So that gene receptor changes the way that we process this stuff.
I'm skeptical and curious to understand how that would work, but it's fine. It is what it is. They found the correlation. They published it. Then we are reporting on it now.
Right.
Mice that make more protein from the MPDZ gene experience less withdrawal symptoms from alcohol and barbiturates, less withdrawal symptoms. And this is the MPDZ expansion pack DLC for Fortnite.
Yeah, it's so great. So get your V-Bucks to make that happen. I thought that was really fascinating because if there is a I guess an analog for humans in that space where there is a gene that does that, then it would make sense that somebody would continue to use some kind of substance because they don't experience the adverse effects of not being on it. Right. So like, or they're less likely to experience that. Right. So like they can be on it, they can get off of whatever that substance is. So it's not as painful or as difficult to keep like they would keep using because there's not like, or they maybe they wouldn't keep using as much because there's no adverse withdrawal symptoms. Like they're not trying to
That's
use
what
to
I was
escape,
wondering.
you know?
Yeah. Because there's so much of people who part of their motivation to seek out whatever the substance is, when we're talking about substance use disorders specifically, is that you quickly move from, and addiction counselors love to talk about it this way all the time, so it's worth bringing in here, is like there's your baseline of normal everyday functioning, and as you start using a substance, the baseline starts to slowly titrate downward into like pain, so that like
Right.
your baseline everyday experience is just discomfort, pain, confusion, hangover, like all of that. And so then initially what happens is your baseline of normal everyday functioning, you take some ever drug, and that moves you into space of like euphoria, elevated, everything is like more intense and more stimulating and more interesting, etc. And eventually what happens is your baseline moves down into sort of pain and discomfort. And so bringing the drug just brings you back up to normal functioning baseline, rather
Right.
than bringing you all the way to euphoria. It's just like, now I just need this to get through the day, is the
Right.
where that can go. And at least that's how people talk about it. But I mean, that's, I think, a very, very loose colloquial way of describing that experience, and not necessarily as closely titrated to what I would think of as being sort of a behavioral interpretation, if you will. But
Right.
that's okay. I think it's a useful heuristic to categorize it that way, to just sort of have one way of framing the experience.
Yeah, I think that's a super helpful way to look at it, because you know, for some folks it starts that it feels good, and then it moves into this helps me not hurt. And you know, and then that just kind of gets worse and worse as things go too. So now there were some studies that showed that people with 2 copies of a specific form of the gene CHRNA5 are 2 times as likely to become nicotine addicted. Again, this is correlate, but just to kind of get into this idea, the gene specifically codes for a protein that helps cells sense nicotine. So cells tend to be more sensitive to nicotine in your system. And so folks that have that specific form, those 2 copies, are more likely to be hypersensitive to nicotine in general.
I always have the question on studies like this of the chicken and the egg problem here, of like, it's unlikely that what they're doing is taking someone who does not have this expression of this gene and then get them addicted to cigarettes and then test them for the expression.
Right. Right.
So I think what I don't know is like, is it possible that using tobacco or nicotine products expresses this gene in this way? Or at least for some people, it like sort of turns it on, if you will. And so, because I imagine you could look at people who use nicotine and don't see this specific form of the gene, but like for the people for whom it does, are we sure that it was being expressed that way first, or is it something that
Right.
happened when they started using nicotine? So anyway.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that. I mean, I would be interested to see if I have it. Only because I've never smoked in my life. Like, I've never smoked
Yeah.
cigarettes or anything like that in my life, and I have no interest in it, right? But my mom, I mean, I grew up with it. My mom was like she smoked like a chimney. Like, I mean, the
Wow.
walls in our house were yellow because of all the smoking that was done inside the house. You know, I mean, she's
Oof.
quit cold turkey. She's been cold turkey. She quit cold turkey 18 years ago, so she's good now. But it was one
Wow.
of those things where you know, she was smoking so much that I wonder, I would be interested to see if that shows up in any of our testing.
Sure. On the other side of this, contact with the reinforcing properties of a substance, the like good parts, the stuff that makes us feel good,
Yeah.
can alter behavior. And I mean, that is just how reinforcers work, right? When we're
Nice and
able
simple.
to yeah, we experience something good that we really enjoy in some capacity. It's something that we tend to continue to seek out, however we got there. In other circumstances, that activity may produce both primary and secondary reinforcers. And that creates this unique context where behavior is more likely to occur. And so when we talk about primary, we're talking about good feeling, and things that we don't have to learn, like escaping from pain,
Right.
access to pleasure, that
Right.
things in particular that feel really good, and anything that sort of falls in those 2 categories, really. It's like escape from things that
Right.
suck and getting things that feel good. Those are the primary. The secondary ones can be other things like social reinforcers. That we have people around us who push us to do this, and we receive acceptance from them and inclusion with them when we sort of feed off of each other in that way. Or in the case of gambling, you get money, which is that secondary reinforcer that is very, very, very powerful at motivating and maintaining behavior.
Yeah. So like let's actually consider gambling for a second, because I think that a lot of people say that gambling is you're addicted to trying to get that payout. And they don't really look at, or you're addicted to the risk or something like that, right? So but let's unpack this for a second, because I think it's important to understand that the context in which gambling occurs is so much more complex than people give it, right? So we
Mhm.
already know through research that gambling is rewarded on kind of like this what feels to be a random schedule. Like you don't really
Yeah,
know when
unpredictable.
yeah, very unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen. And that payout is just random enough or just unpredictable enough that you continue to engage in the behavior, right? Like that's kind of
Right.
how gambling is set up. It's like you win just enough to keep you hooked, even though by the time you win, you've already lost $100, right? So you're not really winning a whole lot to make up for what's going on. You're kind of in the hole. But in a lot of spaces where gambling is happening, there's drinking, there's smoking, there's music that's pleasant to our ears, there's social interaction, there's food sometimes, there's there's lights and sounds and all this stuff, and that's all happening inside of the same context, and all of those are producing rewards tangentially. So that's all getting like mixed in, and it's like those are all multiple ingredients that are getting mixed in into this gambling context, so that when we talk about gambling addictions, it's not just the payout. It's now not only is it the payout, but it's the ritual, it's the context, it's the food, it's the social reinforcers, all those things. And then what can happen is whenever somebody sees like some type of flashing strobe light from some type of machine, or the neon lights, or smelling cigars or cigarettes, or maybe even like a certain shade of green that's maybe on the poker table or the roulette table or something like that. All of those, because of those that history of reward around it, can produce these really unique and really powerful motivations to go right back into that gambling behavior. All of that is learned. All of that is powerful. All of that is linked in together. And that is why something as simple as gambling addiction can be so complicated, because of all of that mixed in, that you can't pull out the individual ingredients anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody has ever like found a slot machine with like a sticky handle in the back of an unassuming gas station, and like that's how they got addicted to gambling. Because just as you said, like
Right.
the casinos really work hard to engineer an environment to maximize participation in that environment. It
Right.
is fun, it is comfortable, it is never ending, it is seamless, it is easy, and like it is they do all there's all kinds of entertainment and primary and secondary reinforcers built in to try and continue to maintain a high level of engagement for as long as possible. And like honestly, like why wouldn't they do that? That is essentially what their business is. Like they're not really trying
Right.
to get people in and out the door as quickly as they can. That's not what they do. And so like it's very perfectly set up to motivate the people who design those spaces to do that, and for the people who then come in to reap the benefits is like the way I want to say, to essentially like they then participate in the space that was engineered just for them to enjoy it. Um,
Right.
and and they do take a more or less one size fits all model, because like certainly people are going to walk into a casino and be like, this is not my scene, this is not for me. But for the
Yeah.
most part, I think they've been able to capture and lean on the things that people enjoy to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, this is one of those things where you might be going, I don't get it. And you're right. And that's fair. You might not get it. Like this may not be your bag, right? Like, for me, I don't like gambling. Like, I don't like losing money. It's not fun to me, like to just like lose money to lose money. And like the environment is just not like fun. It's like loud and overstimulating, and there's a lot going on. And it's just something that is not for me, right? Like I know that about myself. It's not true for everybody though, you know?
I very much enjoy gambling. I don't go really very often. Um,
But you like
but
games. Like it's kind
that's
of like a
true.
game, and you also understand the mechanisms of it. So like you can kind of go, okay, I'm good.
That's a good point. Yeah, it all sort of. I'm still throwing dice. I'm still playing cards. It's just sometimes I win a lot of money, and most times I lose a lot of money, and that's how
Right.
that system works.
Right.
Well, we could probably stand to make a little money and transition to some ads.
That's fair.
All right. we are back to talk about statistics of all of your favorite things that people,
Yeah.
they're like, you know what I signed up for when I got into podcast? Numbers. Just read me those numbers, baby.
Yeah. Yeah, because you know what, like if it wasn't already that the radio format was boring enough, like let's go ahead and like add like numbers to it. But I do think when we start talking about this idea of addiction and like, you know, part of this is not like an unsubtle thing, right? Like this is absolutely something that is impactful, and like we wanted to spend a little bit of time showing like the level of impact that this has, at least in the United States. So just to kind of go into this, 50% of people who are 12 and older have used an illicit drug at least one time, right? And so most people have tried cannabis. That makes sense. Like it's probably the easiest access and, you know, kind of around. But cocaine is
Yeah.
the next most commonly used illicit drug.
Man, 12 is young. Man.
12 is young. So 12 and older, 50% of folks who are 12 and older have used.
Wow. Drug overdose deaths in the United States are nearing 1 million since the year 2000. So over the last 2.5 decades, about that is an unfortunately large number of lost lives.
Right. And then another unfortunately large number, the federal budget for drug control in the US in 2020 was $35 billion.
Wow. Imagine what
Yeah.
else we could be doing with that money.
Right? Absolutely. Like just to decriminalize stuff, and it would save a whole lot of money.
Yeah. 138.522 million Americans 12 and older drink alcohol. Oof. I'm hoping that the
A
vast
lot.
majority of those are much older than 12.
You would hope so, but I would hazard a guess that there's probably a large contingent that are underage.
Oh, sad.
I know. 25.4% of illegal drug users have a drug or addiction disorder. So folks that are using illegal drugs don't necessarily have an addictive disorder. And I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. 24.7% of users. So, okay. So let's round these numbers out a little bit. So we talked about like 138 million Americans was the 0.522, but let's just say almost 140 million people, 12 and older drink. About a quarter of illicit drug users have an addiction disorder. About a quarter of illicit drug users with addiction disorders have an opioid related use disorder specifically.
Right. Which is, you know, that's a pretty decent chunk of addiction disorders.
Yeah.
About 5% of people in non-metropolitan counties or rural areas use illegal drugs. So 5% of people that live in rural spaces use drugs. But 20% of people who live in larger cities are more likely to use drugs. So if you live in a bigger city, you're more likely to see some drug use in that space.
Quite a bit more, apparently.
Yeah.
Drug use is highest among people between 18 to 25, with the next demographic being right after that of 26 to 29, which does make sense to me. Like that does seem like those are kind of the years.
Yeah, I could see that. Now about 70% of users who try illegal drugs before 13 develop a substance abuse disorder within the next 7 years. And so they've kind of found that there is again, that's correlational, but that is they're starting to see there's a pattern there at least.
Yeah. Starting young seems to be particularly troubling here, I think.
Right.
For multiple reasons, really, but that is an undiscomforting statistic there.
Right.
Okay, roughly 70,000 people die as a result of drug overdoses in the United States every year. So the number I gave before was 1 million deaths since the year 2000. We have roughly 70,000 dying every annually, basically.
Yeah, and that number is increasing by about 4% every year. So that is a stat that is getting worse. Now, however, we are going to talk about kind of the data reporting on that and whether or not that's quite accurate, but that's the common information that's coming out for folks right now.
That is a very important piece of it. And it is important to note that people might be hearing this and wondering, I don't know. I'm hearing this and having the thought, and so I'm guessing someone else is too, that like that number seems low if you consider alcohol. These numbers do not consider alcohol. Alcohol way outpaces these by an enormous margin, and we'll get to that later when we're talking about alcohol specifically, because that one kind of is its own thing. But yeah, these numbers are just the illicit drugs that we've been talking about, and the number of people who have died from cannabis overdose using specifically like natural cannabis, not the synthesized stuff.
Mm-hmm.
0.
0. Yep.
Yep.
Something to think about. Um, Now in 2017, about 68% of overdose related deaths that were attributed to overdose were opioid related. Now to break that down, about 29,000 people died from fentanyl. 17,000 people had a prescription opioid issue, and then about 15,000 were heroin related. Now,
Wow.
now I want to unpack this for a second, and this is something that we are going to spend a lot of time talking about with data reporting. A lot of times overdose related deaths are caused by a lot of factors, not just overuse. It's not just that they took
Right.
too much of something. And so we are going to spend a lot of time on that because I think it's important to make sure that we can dissect and like clearly delineate what's considered an overdose death and what's not. Like what's considered an overdose in particular. That in itself is really important to discuss.
Yeah.
So, but just keep that in mind that you're seeing a high rate of opioid users passing away as a result of overuse in some way.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. Is that there's I think a maybe lesser known aspect of overdose that is not just the quantity that is taken. And nevertheless, it is an overdose because there are definitely a lot of other complications that come from use of drugs that have detrimental health outcomes. I mean, operating heavy machinery like driving a car certainly comes to mind as one.
Right.
And it's very possible, like, and when I was talking about cannabis, I was talking about overdosing specifically. Nobody has died from an overdose, but plenty of people have died doing dumb things when they were on drugs, when they walked into traffic, they tried to operate heavy machinery, they maybe drank something they weren't supposed to, they fell asleep in a position that meant that they ended up choking on their own vomit or something like that.
Yeah.
Like a lot of horrible tragic ways that people have passed that are not directly related to overdosing on a drug specifically.
Yeah.
But and as we said, that is a also very complex thing to unpack because what it means to be an overdose and how these statistics are aggregated is leaves room for a little bit of inquiry, I guess, about how we really understand these topics, if you will.
Right.
And we'll be getting to those in further discussions. But I think it's worth then just considering. I think we're sort of getting to the end of what today's discussion is meant to be. So where is this all going?
Right. So I think for the next few episodes, we are going to start unpacking these topics in a lot more detail. And that's because addiction and dependency is incredibly complex. We could have tried to cover it in a single episode. There was no way we're going to do that. Or we could have even looked at a 2-part episode. There was no way we're going to do that. I mean, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of any of this stuff. I mean,
Right.
but I think at the end of the day, its impact is pretty clear. And this type of situation impacts the lives of millions of people. I mean, you just mentioned, how many deaths or accidents are related to not even drug related, but like something dumb that happens while somebody is under the influence. I mean, my best friend right now, like my best friend from like high school, he is in the hospital right now because he had too much to drink and walked out in the traffic and got hit by a car. And so he's ribs, neck, both of his legs, his pelvis shattered. I mean, he is going to be in the hospital for some time. And it was not because of alcohol, but because he was too drunk to pay attention to what he was doing. Right. So like, but knowing that situation, and he's going to be okay, just so everybody is aware, like he's going to be okay. He's going to recover, from that situation. He's alive and no brain damage. But the point is that that's something that impacts me, and I don't have a dependency like in that situation. Right. So as we start talking about this, everybody's got a story like that. Some are more harrowing than others. And like I said, we both have all kinds of stories that we could share. But we wanted to make sure that we gave all of these topics enough time to talk about them. Like we wanted to really make sure that we gave them the breadth that they needed.
And I also think like, we are enormously sympathetic to the people who struggle with addiction.
Yes.
I also I've been in the position of being enormously frustrated by people who are dealing with addiction because it is really hard to be in that person's orbit and watch their self-destruction, to have their problems affect you very directly when you can't rely on them, or you need to like drop everything you're doing and go help them, or all of a
Right.
sudden they're like in an emergency situation that is like, how would you keep getting yourself into this mess? And like, so I think there's people who have been around this who have experienced an enormous amount of frustration and anger, and your experience is valid too. But
Right.
also, like, as we dig into understanding the behavioral mechanisms of how addiction works, and all of the complex factors that maintain dependency in these things, neurologically, behaviorally, psychologically, etc., that you really can't help but feel just, I feel like, for myself at least, just so much, I think, empathy, but also just like a desire to try and help these people who most of the time want help. They mostly don't want to be in the situation that they're in, but they don't necessarily know how to get out of it. And a lot of them
Right.
don't think that they need help, but they also know that like they would be better off if they were not engaging to the point that they are, at the very least. So, we're going to spend the next few episodes covering various aspects of addiction that include treatment, and we're going to tackle that from a couple of different angles. So that might span more than an episode. As a matter of fact, I'm already planning on that spanning more than an episode.
Right.
Types of addiction, because we're going to dig into both substances as well as behavioral addictions. And we'll probably take on even the war of drugs. Spoiler alert, the drugs won.
Right.
And also talk about the terribly racist policy that has been incredibly harmful for decades.
Right. Absolutely. And so I think it's important to kind of look at what our goal is, right? And I think that you said it perfectly. Our goal is to shed some light on this, to provide information, to look at this from our philosophical viewpoint, but hopefully give folks that are listening to this some tools to be more compassionate for those folks while this is going on. Because I think that it is, again, incredibly complex, and there are a lot of emotions. The emotions run high, and it's very easy to feel a certain way. But I think it is really important to reflect and to think deeply about what's happening, and to try to cope with it the best you can, because it is not an easy road for anybody involved.
Yeah. So did you already do the what's our goal here thing?
Kind of. Yeah. I mean,
Okay. Okay.
let me finish that. I'll finish that point a little bit. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
So personally, I think you would be hard pressed to find someone in your life who hasn't been impacted by addiction if you haven't yourself. And I also think, though, there are many myths about addiction that I think are worth dispelling, because here we like to myth bust, but I think there are far more myths, and part of that is because of the war on drugs. Part of that is because of DARE. Part of that is because of a lot of marketing from people who don't understand it. And I think that because of that, I think it's created a lot of problems for compassion towards folks with addiction, for understanding how programs work, and just I think it's caused a lot more problems than people realize too.
Yeah, and there's just so much misinformation, and like people leverage this for politics. They'll have all these talking points about it, and that are just, they're either sideways, like it's like, I mean, in a way that's kind of true, but you're really just exploiting it for political expedience. Damn it, my
Right.
thing stopped recording again. I hate this. I don't know why it's doing this. Okay. But they're really just exploiting this for political expediency. And so I think trying to combat the misinformation, trying to bust those myths, trying to like get a more, I think, skeptical, scientific, thoughtful consideration out there is the purpose of these discussions. And as you were mentioning that, I was just reflecting on the fact that, man, we have covered drugs in some capacity so much on this show. We've talked about DARE, we've talked about alcohol, we've talked about cannabis, we talked about just the use of drugs and like psychedelics for therapy in like a 2 or 3 part series that we did with the guest.
Right.
We have really, really talked about drugs.
We talked about ketamine,
and
like we talked about like ketamine as a treatment. Like we've talked about a lot of stuff, but we've never gotten into this part of it.
You know what I think we have not done is ergot and like and LSD and that sort of thing, and that probably is going to have to happen at some point as well, but not
Yeah.
the purpose of this suite of episodes at the very least.
Right. So I think kind of to my summary in all this is that we want to keep in mind as we're going forward, we're talking about addiction, we're talking about people. And even if we are considering the behavior and not people are the problem, then we have a better understanding of their behavior, and it will give folks struggling with addiction a little more grace and a little bit more compassion to help them find their way to recovery, whatever that means for them and the folks around them.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Okay, so we might what I'm about to ask you we may cut, but is this a moment where we want to get into the discussion of disease model of addiction, or are we saving that for a later thing?
I think we should probably save that for a later one.
Okay. Okay, cool. Beep. Well, I really don't want to undermine your ending on a beautiful point, but I just like to sort of give our sort of take home, I think, is really landing on what that definition was and feeling like we're all like everyone's really clearly on the same page here. And I think the important thing that we identified that is useful for trying to categorize something as being an addiction is that repeated behavior or action. So, and it happens relatively frequently, not just repeated like 2 or 3 times over the course of a lifetime, but it
Right.
happens pretty regularly and high frequency, where the organism, in this case we're mostly talking about people, they do some behavior or some action to obtain a substance, or it's some activity that they're doing, and that there are some harmful or adverse effects to the organism as they do this seeking. And I think that there's more to unpack in this, and I think understanding how this arranges and modulates what our outcomes are that we're looking for, how it creates different habits and patterns of behavior that then have their own set of like specific cues in the environment, and associated reinforcers, et cetera. And I think we'll talk more about that as we get into other ways of just classifying and thinking about um, uh, addiction. And the one thing that we didn't say that we are going to talk about later is the disease model of addiction and where we fall
Right.
on that, which is inconsistent with that view of to
Right.
put it lightly.
Right.
So what we will get to that, but I think that, as you said, you did such a nice job of summarizing this. I sort of undermined it, but
You're good.
yes, we want to give a thought for those folks who are struggling with this, and bring some level of compassion and understanding to them, while also
Yep.
taking a very scientific and objective view of this, which I think the scientific objective view enables compassion. I think that it fosters a solution oriented approach to what we're going to do in this space when we're talking about and trying to help folks of this nature. So that's
Right.
part of why this is something that we feel strongly about, is that the science view is the humanist view.
Right. 100%. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Great. Well, unfortunately, I think that we need to thank a bunch of people and give credit where credit is due. We would like to recommend some things, which, if you're joining us for the first time, at the end of our discussions, we give some recommendations, usually wholly unrelated to the topic that we were just discussing,
Right.
which is definitely the case here. And so we'll get to all of that right after a quick break for some advertisements.
Nice.
ADS stands for advertisements.
Oh, that I had no idea.
So I felt like I should just spell it out. Okay. Before we get to our recommendations, I would like to just tell you, if you'd like to support this podcast, if you'd like to support what we do, you can join us over on Patreon. There you'll get access to all kinds of extra stuff like early episodes, notes, behind the scenes content, all that. And you get to join this group of people of like-minded, generous, awesome folks who help make this show possible, which includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, Christy, and Michelle. Thank you all so much for being here with us, for all that you do. We really, really appreciate you. Just mucho.
Yes. Mucho appreciation. I'm not even gonna try. I'm not even gonna be that person to try. I'm just gonna say thank you.
Man.
We appreciate you.
We both acknowledge that we need to learn Spanish.
Yeah.
Also, writing and fact checking from Shane and myself. Shane, thank you so much for putting together your wonderful notes on today's episode,
Anytime.
on our discussion. Also, our audio editing and production comes from Justin Greenhouse, and our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson. Is there anything that I am missing here or that you would like to add before we get to our recommendations?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, then let's recommend some things.
I love it.
You want to go first? You want me to go first?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. I'll go first. All right.
right.
I'm recommending a movie. This movie just came out, I believe, in 2023. This is a horror movie that is based off of a video game, but kind of a video game. It's based off of an app and kind of an app. This was a pretty lo-fi thing that they did here, but it is nevertheless very fun and supportive. So this is a movie called Five Nights at Freddy's. It's available on all kinds of platforms now. I know that I watched it recently on Amazon Prime Video, so I know that it's there. But I'm given to understand it's across many different streaming platforms. If you are interested in watching this, the overall theme of this is like, imagine that Chuck E. Cheese animatronics came to life and started killing people. I think
That's the way. That's it.
that's the very short summary of this. So Five Nights at Freddy's, it was here, it didn't get super great ratings, but honestly I thought a lot of it worked really well. I thought they made some really smart choices. I thought that they did a good job setting up parts, premises and parts of the plot that would then pay off later and made a lot of sense without like overly tipping their hand. So I think they did a good job of like giving just enough exposition that you could figure it out a lot of the time without necessarily deliberately explaining things. Some things they over explained, some things didn't make as much sense, but you know, it's about animatronics coming to life and killing people. So like at some point you are suspending your disbelief to like allow the movie to happen. And I thought it was really fun. So I think if you're into I feel like sort of easy access horror movie that you would, most people that are into that sort of thing will enjoy Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, it seemed like a lot of fun. My son was like obsessed with that. Like he like for a long time, and so like he got to go see that in theaters. He was really excited about it and said it was a lot of fun. So yeah,
good.
All right, so my recommendation is a place that I think might be heaven on earth. There is a place called in Jacksonville, Florida, called the Chamblin Book Mine. And it is exactly what you think it is. It is a book mine. It is not a bookstore. It is a book mine. So I went to this place yesterday, and they to give you a little bit of insight. This one building I went to, it's in the Avondale neighborhood of Jacksonville. So it's in Jacksonville, Florida. Okay. It is the largest bookstore in the Southeast, which it absolutely is. And it continues to get bigger. The store I went into is 55,000 square feet.
Wow.
And there are over 3 million books inside this place.
So that's where all the books in Florida went.
That's oh yeah. This place is it's an unstoppable juggernaut of like banned books. They're all there. No, it's actually
this is Ron DeSantis's Everest. Like
this is
primary adversary.
Or his like very personal hell. Like he's like, there are too many words there. Too many words I don't like. So this place was a labyrinth. Like that's the best way I can describe it. It was floor to ceiling books. I mean, hundreds of rows and aisles. It was incredible. And they had everything you could think of. Like you could not walk into that place and leave empty-handed. Like I ended up finding a bunch of like Charles Bukowski books that I had never seen. I found a book from Koji Suzuki, who wrote The Ring. Wrote a book about how scientists calculate pi out, but then they start finding patterns, like repeating patterns, and they're like, that shouldn't happen, but it's basically because the fabric of the universe has changed. They don't know why, which is scary. Cool. And I don't know, man. I'm gonna dream about this place because it was just so incredible, and it was like they also had like a local section, which was really cool. They had like features of the month. There was a lot of activism related books up there. Like it was a really great experience. So could not recommend this place harder.
Yeah, I'm surprised that this exists in Florida, but I also like those books had to go somewhere, so it makes sense that they ended up in a mine.
Uh-huh.
And that sounds really interesting. You know, I feel like we recently completed an episode on the apocalypse. And were there to be an apocalypse, getting holed up in a place like that would be pretty sweet. Because
Uh-huh.
man, you could really keep yourself busy with a lot of book learning.
Oh yeah, I just sent you a picture just so you can see kind of the scope of one single aisle, and I'm telling you, there were like several wings.
Whoa. Wow. So
That's what I'm
in
saying.
real time, listeners, yeah, I just received a text from Shane that looks like sort of the library from Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
except so much bigger. Um,
Uh-huh.
just
Now imagine
the
that
ceilings are
times like
taller, the rows are longer.
300.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. Well, that is very cool. So Chamblin Book Mine in
Yes.
Jacksonville, Florida, for those wanting to check it out.
Yep. Love it.
All right. If you would like to tell us something about addiction that we got wrong, that we got right, that you would like to contribute to, just to expand on something that we said, or share your own personal stories, we would love to hear from you. You can reach out to you can, beep, you can reach out to us directly by emailing us at info@wwd.wwdpodcast.com. You can also reach out to us on the social media platforms, and we will talk to you there. And as I said, sharing this with a friend, leave us a rating, review, all this sort of thing. Thank you so much for listening with us. Thank you for recording with me today, Shane. And
Anytime.
yeah, I think there's probably some more to say about this. You know what, we have not typically given away what the next topic's going to be week to week. And most of the time that's because we don't know. But this time the plan at least is that our next episode will tackle Alcoholics Anonymous. So if
Uh-huh.
you're interested, stop back by for that. As we continue to work through the suite, and maybe we'll continue to sort of give a little teasers of what's coming up next, or just straight up tell you. You can let us know if you don't want to know and keep the weekly surprise spoiler free. Then we'll stop telling you, and that's okay too.
Yeah,
But as I said, you have to reach out to us to let that be the case, and we hope that you do.
absolutely.
Anything you'd like to add, or anything that I forgot before we say our goodbyes, Shane?
Just thank you for joining on this ride. It's gonna be a wild one.
This will be a wild one. Perfect. All right, then. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
Ruby.
All right.
I don't know why it just like it says system overload, and then it just stops recording. And sometimes it will like have shown that it was recording for a while, and then it actually didn't record like a few seconds of what I was saying before it just stops. And it seems to only happen when I'm recording.
Weird.
And like when you're talking, it doesn't just stop. It's only when I'm talking. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but it is. I
That's
don't
very
like it.
strange. I don't like that. I don't like it one bit.
Bad.
It's so bad.
Groovy.
All right. My stuff is exporting now.
Same. All right. Well, so still good for that mini?
Yeah, let's do it.
Kick ass. All right. So I'll once this is exported, I'll open up a new one. I'll be ready to go. If you want to jump over to the notes on that mini, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
The
I've got
only
it pulled up right
thing
now.
that Okay, sweet. Yeah, the only thing that may catch you a little off guard here is I was like trying to figure out, I'm like, what would be a good like hypothetical scenario to use in unpacking these, and I decided to go with gun violence, and we'll see how that actually shakes out as we're talking through it. Um, but I also thought it was really clever because I basically said like observation, more than 48,000 people die of gun violence in the United States in 2021 specifically. All right, hypothesis, there are not enough guns. If we had more guns, there'd be fewer deaths. That's the hypothesis. And I figured I'd go that route because that's the way that so many people go, is like the solution is not less guns, the solution is more guns. I'm like, that is a hypothesis. Sure, that's
Sure.
a testable statement that we can look at some data. So,
This will be
but
fun. This is gonna piss off so many people.
yeah.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah, and I sort of like, technically you could put it just three because it's like hypothesis, law, and theory, but I put in observation because it's like all of these are predicated on the fact that something is observed. So,
Right, right.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We also recorded all of that for our patrons, so we should say goodbye, patrons. Go look at the actual episode.
Yep. Have fun, patrons.